morning, everyone. Thank you so much, firstly, to Toko, Isabella, for inviting me. I hope I'm clear enough. Yeah, for inviting me to share my thoughts on state party reporting. Quite an honor for us. I hope this will not be the first and last. As Togo was saying in the introduction, we have a practical session in about 2 hours' time when Malawi will be presenting her second and third periodic report to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So that's real state party reporting in action. In terms of the topic which I was asked to share on, I'll share with you my experiences in state party reporting. And at the end of it, we will be able to answer the question whether state party reporting is indeed a sufficient tool for human rights protection. So a brief description of what we do or what I do. I head the human rights section here in the Ministry of Justice. And the human rights section's primary work is to coordinate state party reporting. So each time I go to work, I come here in this office, all I think about is state party reporting and human rights. So what I'll share with you are my experiences in the past maybe 10, 15 years as far as state party reporting is concerned. And then, as I said, at the end of it, we'll be able to answer the question whether it's an effective tool or not. Now, we can go to the next slide. I'll start by briefly describing what state party reporting is. Just briefly, so that we should have a discussion. We are defining it as essentially a process where state party submit reports on the status of human rights in their respective countries. So for us, for example, we are, am I clear enough? The internet is a bit jumpy here.
Okay, may I suggest that the rest of us switch our cameras off at this point to decrease the bandwidth, please?
Yeah, I can continue.
Yes, please.
Can I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Yeah. So this morning, we will essentially be giving an update on the status of human rights in Malawi in relation to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, as well as the Maputo Protocol on the Rights of Women. So that's essentially what state party reporting is. You sign a treaty, you ratify a treaty, you are required to submit reports, essentially to explain to the treaty body how you are implementing the rights and freedoms which are enshrined in that treaty. And we as a member of the international community, a member of the United Nations, a member of the African Union, and to some extent SADC, we do submit those reports periodically. And I'm giving an example here that next slide, we submitted our initial report on the African Charter in 2013, and it was reviewed in 2015. And then here today, we are having the second and third reports reviewed. Next slide. Hello.
Isabel, could you switch to the next slide? Or maybe there are problems.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Sorry.
Okay. Maybe you can continue and I try in the meantime.
All right. So that's what state party reporting is all about. To give you an example, Malawi is party to the African Charter, which I've mentioned. We're a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that's the UN. We are party to the Convention Against Torture, CAT, that's the UN. With all those, we are expected to submit periodic reports. Now, the next question I would need to answer is in terms of what actually goes into the report. When you say state party reporting, what really goes into the report? The reports require us to submit updates or to give information on the administrative policy as well as institutional steps we've taken enjoyment and protection of human rights. So today, with the African Commission, what we'll be telling the African Commission is that since our previous review in 2015, this is what we have done to ensure that the rights and freedoms enshrined in the African Charter are fully implemented in Malawi. We have passed this number of legislation. We have adopted this number of policies. We have established this number of institutions, and maybe we have taken the following administrative steps. Now, a proper functioning human rights protection system will need a legal basis, that is legislation. We need institutions to promote and protect human rights. We need policies which add on the legislation, and we need administrative steps. Those are the things which we include in a state party report, explaining essentially, to say this is what we've done, this is how we are promoting and protecting human rights in Malawi. Next slide. That's what goes into a state party report. Next slide. Now, how important, or what is the importance of state party reporting? I've given three examples here. Number one, I'm calling it an accountability tool. Secondly, it's an advocacy tool. And thirdly, I'm saying it is a brand promotion tool. By accountability tool, I essentially mean that through state party reporting, countries are called to account on how they are protecting the human rights of their. So it is a very useful accountability tool. If we go to the African Union or the African Commission, as we are doing today, this is what Malawi is doing. The whole world can call us to account, to say, okay, you have done well in this area, you have not done well in this area. How about this issue? For example, in Malawi, we are having a big issue with attacks on persons with albinism. As reporting today, we have given updates on what we are doing, but we expect a lot of questions around that area. So in other words, the international community, as well as domestic institutions, will call us to account what really we are doing as far as the promotion and protection of human rights. This goes to human rights practitioners, human rights defenders, civil society organizations, as well as national human rights institutions. Once we submit our report, at the end of that process, we get what are called concluding observations or recommendations. In other words, the relevant committee, in this case today, the African Commission, will give us recommendations to say, okay, Malawi, we have heard you, but we want you to improve on this. Can you pass this legislation to address this? On attacks on persons with albinism, can you maybe amend law ABC? Maybe you need to create institution ABC, or maybe you need to ratify to this international instrument, things like those. So once we get those recommendations, because it's supposed to implement those recommendations. But for civil society, human rights defenders, national human rights institutions, it is their job to use those recommendations to hound, if I may use that word, to hound the government of Malawi to say, okay, you got this recommendation, now can you go ahead and implement them? That's why I'm calling it an advocacy tool, a very useful advocacy tool. I'll give you an example. In 2017, Malawi amended the constitution to raise the age of the child from 16 to 18. This is a classic case where recommendations flowing from state party reporting were used to advocate for the amendment of the Constitution. So we got a lot of recommendations for us to raise the age of the child from the CRC Committee, Convention on the Rights of the Child, from the African Commission itself, from the CEDAW Committee, from the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations. So once we got all those recommendations, civil society organizations used those recommendations to push the government of Malawi to amend the Constitution. That's a classic case where it worked as an advocacy too. Brand promotion too. Brand promotion too is where, as a member of the international community, we can go out and essentially promote ourselves to say, this is what Malawi is doing. These are the good practices from Malawi. Come and hear from Malawi, come and learn from Malawi. That's why I'm calling it a brand promotion, promoting the country brand, essentially, the Malawi brand. So in the case of Malawi, there have been certain areas where we've been used as a best practice in state party reporting. Number one, the model of how we compile our reports has been borrowed by several other countries as a best practice. And that means we are promoting ourselves as a best practice country. So to the extent of the three reasons I've given on the importance of state party reporting, I'm going further to say it is to that extent that state party reporting is a human rights protection to abate with its own limitations. So we'll see as we proceed that there are actually limitations, but it is indeed a tool. And to me, it is a tool which is underutilized, one, and it is a tool which needs other tools or other systems for it to flourish as a very useful tool in terms of protection of human rights. Next slide. Yeah, so I'm asking the question, who coordinates state party reporting? This depends on various countries. Some countries, it's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Some countries, it's the Ministry of International Cooperation, or whatever. But in the case of Malawi, it's the Ministry of Justice, because human rights is under justice. So in our case, it's my section, the human rights section, which coordinates the state party reporting. And I'm explaining on bullet number 3 there that the human rights section is what we call Malawi's national mechanism for reporting and follow-up. It is our job to compile the reports. It is our job to submit the reports, and then the follow-up mechanism. After today, we have been reviewed by the African Commission. What happens? We have to implement the recommendations and the concluding observations, and we have to prepare for the next reporting cycle. Next slide. Next. Yeah, so here we are, basically, I think this I've already talked about, and I think let's jump to the next one. I've already explained about the legislative, administrative, institutional, and other measures. I'm just giving an example here that since October 2019, we have submitted 4 state party reports. And that's the Convention Against Torture, the African Charter, and Maputo Protocol, Universal Periodic Review, and the CEDAW. 4 reports in this time, we think that is a lot of reports because the average drafting of a report takes 8 months because you have to consult people, you have to talk to people. So we think that is quite a good show. And presently we are drafting reports on international covenant on economic, social, cultural rights, Convention on enforced disappearances, as well as the African Charter and the rights and welfare of the child. Next. Right, so I think you can go to the next one. This I have to a large extent talked about. Yeah, here I'm sharing a bit of how we do the state party reporting. And I think as you listen, you'll be able to see how it is an effective tool of human rights protection. I'm saying that the approach which we've taken as a country is that we establish national task forces on each report or on each treaty. So for example, we have a national task force on the African Charter, a national task force on universal periodic review, a national task force on Convention Against Torture. What happens is when you are supposed to report on the African Charter, this national task force, which is chaired by the Ministry of Justice, acts as the drafting committee. So we meet we look at the requirement, what goes into the committee, and who does which tasks in terms of getting information. And this task force comprises government ministries, civil society organizations. So the idea is to make sure that this report is really a state budget, it's a state report. It's not a Ministry of Justice report. That's why we get in civil society. And once civil society come in, they're able to speak their mind, to say, we want this to go into the report. This area we're not doing fine. Can you include this issue? So it's a very open and transparent process. And I'm saying in bullet 3 that to that extent, this is where the state budget reporting process is a tool for constant review of human rights issues. And I'm giving an example on the National Task Force on the African Charter that we meet very regularly, even when we are not submitting a report. We meet regularly just to discuss human rights, just to discuss current issues. So you have someone from the police, you have someone from the Malawi Human Rights Commission, you have civil society there, and they will talk to say, no, in my mandate, these are the issues which are there. Maybe we have a lot of cases of police brutality. Maybe we have a lot of cases of sexual and gender-based violence. Can you do something about it? So as a task force, when we hear those issues, when we discuss those issues, we now come up with a way of how do we address them? How do we deal with this challenge? And to that extent, that's where our model of state budget reporting is indeed a tool for human rights protection. Because this task force, once it meets, and as I said, it's chaired by Minister of Justice. Once we meet, we come up with issues. I compile a report and submit to the Minister of Justice to say, these are the issues. We write to relevant ministries, for example, or ministries or departments. If it's the police, I will write to the Inspector General of Police to say, okay, in our meeting of this state, a concern was raised that there are a number of extrajudicial killings in the police service. Can you explain to us what these issues are and what you are doing about it? So, and they have to respond to say, okay, maybe we have had this case, maybe we're investigating. So to that extent, I look at our model of state budget reporting as a useful tool because it sieves out cases and it brings out issues which we need to address as a government. Next. Yeah, so I'm talking a bit about how the drafting process is. And I'm mentioning crucially that a state budget report has to be frank and factual. You don't gloss over issues in a state budget report. And as long as I've been coordinating this state budget reporting, our reports are examples of what frank and honest reports are all about. You know, it's easier for governments to gloss over human rights issues. This is where they will simply talk about the positives. No, we are doing this. No, we are doing fine. There are no issues in this country, blah, 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 blah. I've always said we will not be that naive and irresponsible. So as it is being drafted, as I explained, we get people from various sectors and we speak to say, this is what we've done well, but these are the challenges. So in that case, it's also a tool for human rights protection because we are able to point to say, okay, we're making progress in this area, that in this area we are not, we need to jack up or we need to put in more resources. We need to legislative review, we need to put more people. So our process tries as much as possible to be open and frank. It has to have statistics. If you say the child mortality rate in Malawi has reduced, can you give us statistics for the past 5 years? If you say that we have reduced overcrowding in prisons, because in Malawi, one of the big issues is overcrowding in prisons. If you say we have reduced overcrowding in prisons, can you give us the numbers of prisoners from, for example, 2015? In our report, which will be discussed today, we have clear statistics. In 2013, there were this number, total number of people in our prisons. The next year, this number. And we have to show that the numbers are going down, or we have to show that the room issues is no longer an issue in prisons. That's what has to go into the report. Next. Here I'm talking about the conducive nature of the report, the drafting process. I've already spoken about how we get people from various institutions. I know in other countries that human rights defenders are not allowed to take part in state party reporting because there are always reprisals. In the case of Malawi, we had those challenges maybe 11 or so years ago, but now we have managed to cultivate an extremely good working relationship to the extent that civil society organizations, in most cases, do not submit shadow reports because they take part in the drafting of state party reports. And once they take part, they tell us to say, no, we took part in a state party report. Why should we even draft a shadow report? So in that regard, because of the conducive drafting process, the whole process of state party reporting is to that extent a tool also for us to cultivate a good working relationship with other key players in human rights. It's also a tool of creating trust. This is where anyone in the civil society can pick up their phone today, call the human rights section and say, I want to raise this issue with you. Can you help? I can pick up the phone any time of the day, call leading civil society organization. There's this issue. Do you think you can help? To that extent, I think we have used state party reporting as an immense tool of good relationships in addressing human rights issues. Next. Here I'm talking about the submission and defense of the report. Once you submit the report, you have to defend the way we'll be doing today. We submitted this report in last year. But it takes about a year or so for them to prepare for us to defend the report. That's what we'll be doing today. Next. Next. I think you can go to the next one because of time. So we can go into the concluding observations. I've already spoken largely about this. I hope this presentation will be shared and there's my email there. So if you have other questions after this, you can always ask. But in terms of concluding observations and recommendations, which flow out of a whole state party reporting process like what we'll be doing today, I'm saying that when it comes to recommendations from treaty bodies like the African Commission, Human Rights Commission of the rather Human Rights Committee of the UN, the CEDAW committee, the CRC committee, once they give us those recommendations, we don't have an option of accepting or rejecting the recommendations. This is different from the UPR process. UPR process, the state, because UPR is like a peer review mechanism where you invest a periodic review, where you reject some recommendations you don't want. You are not comfortable in implementing. And I've given an example there that Malawi, under investor periodic review, we routinely reject recommendations on LGBTI, death penalty, and abortion because the government of Malawi has said on these, we are not eager or ready yet to implement these recommendations. But for other recommendations from treaty bodies like the African Commission today, they can say everything they want. We don't have the liberty to cherry pick to say we are comfortable with this, we are comfortable with that. We just receive all the recommendations. Next. So this is where I talk about the lessons. And in the lessons, to me, it's where you will see how useful this is a tool of human rights protection. And you also see the limitations. State party reporting can only do as much. There are other things which are outside the scope of state party reporting. So I'm saying there is no break in the reporting cycle. That's a strength, but also a weakness. If there is no break in the reporting cycle, for example, our African Charter report, we submitted first in 2013, we reviewed 2015, and we submitted another report in 2019. What is supposed to happen that between the submission of reports, we are supposed to be implementing recommendations and concluding observations, which means there's really no resting. I cannot say for a minute that, okay, the African Charter report is due in 2-3 years. Therefore, there's nothing to do on the African Charter. No. Have to continue working on the recommendations to ensure that they're implemented. So to that extent, I would say that state-party reporting is a continuous tool because you continually look at how you have to implement those recommendations, knowing that in a year or two, you have to go back to the same committee and account what you have done. To that extent, it is a strength. The weakness, though, is that in most cases, there's the reporting cycle. So with African treated body mechanisms, normally the reporting cycle is 2 years. That's a short time. But with UN, it's about 4 or 5 years. So what normally happens is if you submit a report, for example, on CEDAW in 2014, you know the next report is 2019 or 2020. What normally happens is that people go to sleep. They forget CEDAW until they get an email from the CEDAW committee to say your report is due next year. That's when they start running around again. Oh, where are the recommendations? That's where the weakness is. So what that means is that you need strong institutions. Like in our case, we have a fully dedicated human rights section, which means that we have a calendar. We know, for example, that next year we have to submit a report on CRC, which means we have to start preparing now. We know for sure that ICCPR is due in 2023. We have to start preparing now. So to that extent, state-party reporting is a continuous tool for the promotion and protection of human rights, but it needs diligence and relevant institutions. One key thing, which is a weakness which I've seen in terms of using state-party reporting as a tool, is that there's need to link state-party reports to other initiatives domestically. So what I'm saying here is that state-party report works to the maximum as a tool for promotion and protection of human rights if they are effective institutions domestically. If there are no effective institutions domestically, it will not work. If there is no effective legal environment domestically, it will not work. Because we get the recommendations from the African Commission to say Malawi do A, B, C, D. Those recommendations come here. Maybe they're asking the Human Rights Commission to do A, B, C, D. If the Human Rights Commission domestically is weak or ineffective, those recommendations will not be implemented. If we get a recommendation, Minister of Justice, can you review or repeal this law? If Minister of Justice is not efficient, effective, and competent, will not be able to do that. So, state-party huge hanging fruit as far as the promotion and protection of human rights is concerned. However, its major weakness is that it needs a conducive domestic environment. Without that, there's a problem. So I'm talking about linking to the bullet number 3, linking to the HRC annual report. The Human Rights Commission here in Malawi is mandated to produce an annual human rights report. And what we have failed to do so far is that once we get the recommendations, we have been unable to see how those recommendations speak to the other reports we have domestically. Look into the report of the Human Rights Commission, and I've done that, and our section has done that. We always find that they speak the same challenges which we get from the African Commission, which we get from the Human Rights Committee, which we get from the Human Rights Council. So what this means is that the problems are the same. These things are speaking to each other. How do we address them? Let these reports and initiatives speak to each other so that when we are taking action, we'll say, okay, the Human Rights Commission spoke about this. The African Human Rights Commission spoke about this. These things are the same things. Can we address them together? So, and the last bullet there, I'm saying that we need to enhance the use of other UN-AU initiatives that feed into or complement state-party reporting. And I've given an example of special rapporteur country visits and the UN Human Rights Committee Council, a special procedure mechanism. What I'm saying here is that state-party reporting should be used with other African Union or UN initiatives, both at the UN and the African Union. They are what are called special procedure mechanisms. This is where special rapporteurs are appointed to address specific human rights issues. So we have had visits and engagement with the special rapporteur on the rights of persons with albinism because of the challenge of attacks on persons with albinism. And that special rapporteur has produced reports. Malawi, do this, do that, do that. We have submitted reports to the Human Rights Council on the same. Question is, how do we relate that to the usual state party reporting? That's where I think we also need to improve in terms of how we can use and enhance the use of these. Conclude in my discussion, explaining what state party reporting and how Malawi has addressed it. Answer the question on the floor. I would say yes, state party reporting is a tool for the promotion and protection of human rights. That it is a limited tool because it needs other tools to hold its hands for it to be effective. And I can also say that I think state party reporting is an underutilized tool, both by governments and human rights defenders. Because for most governments, it's just an obligation of reporting. Once we submit the report, we are done, we have a clear commission, we don't care what happens next. Politically, we look good that we have submitted a report. But do we really want to improve things and change things and use it as a tool? Most governments, and I can assure you, I'm in good company and I talk to state delegates from other countries, the attitude, and I would say to some extent, even here, the attitude is submit a report, clap hands, go home, well done. To me, that should not be the attitude. Submit a report. What comes out of that report? Have they raised issues which we need to work on? Get down to work on those issues. So it is a tool, but it has those limitations. It needs to be effective institutions in the country which will be following up consistently and diligently whatever is coming out of the state party reporting process. So I would for now stop here. And I think in our discussions, we had agreed that you can go to the next slide. I don't know if there's another slide. We had said that I would talk for about 25 or 30 minutes thereabouts, and then you can ask questions or raise issues or comments. So thank you so much. I hope I've been as clear as possible, and I'll be willing to take your questions or comments. And as I said, there's my email on the presentation. If you have other issues, you can always raise with me. The presentation is limited. I wouldn't go into the finer details, but I think I would stop here for now. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yeah, many thanks for that, PK. That's what a masterclass looks like. No one would ever get that kind of insight from the books, and it's just so awesome that you are willing to share these insights with us. I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions from the participants this morning, and I'd like to invite questions now. I'll see in relation to how many are interested in asking a question, then perhaps you can moderate that better. But let me take the first question or set of questions. Guys?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation. My take on it to sort of find out, I know this might be some sort of a stretch from the reports that you talked about. My take is to what extent has the report helped in terms of prosecution of human rights issues, particularly in Malawi? How has the report been able to help drive prosecution in that aspect.
Good, thank you. I take it will take several questions, then I answer
Yes,
together.
yes, that's correct. Isabel?
Yes, thank you for the presentation and sorry for the not so smooth master slider. I'm sorry. So my question is, you talked about the reports that are required from the UN and from the African Union. So my question would be whether you would appreciate a combined report or a sort of calendar that works together, or do you think it is okay that both are separated and that you submit reports, one to the AU and also to the UN?
Okay, we take one more question from Marie, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I have one question that is, so I've heard that you submitted so far 4 reports, and that, so I don't know, maybe this is a bit too soon, but I was wondering if you also kind of evaluate how well the laws have been abided to and exercised. So how well the new legal instruments helped in
Just to cut you short, can you start again, because my internet
sorry.
jumped? Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. I was wondering if in the reports you also evaluate how well your actions have helped encountering, let's say, prison, like polluted, crowded prisons, and yeah, like how well these new laws have been exercised and abided by.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can answer the 3 right now. It's okay. I can go ahead, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, good. God's will asked a question: to what extent have the reports helped to drive prosecution in terms of human rights issues here? To some extent. I can point at certain recommendations or certain issues which came out of state party reports, which rattle the capital, if I may use that word. If they come out of the African Commission or come out of the UN and it's in the newspapers, say the African Commission has told Malawi to do something, the UN Human Rights Council has told Malawi to say investigate this, then back in the capital, you get a few phone calls either from the Minister of Justice or whoever to say, no, I've read in the newspaper and we are not happy. Can you do something about it? So to some extent it has to what I would call highly political issues. And that is unfortunate, because I would want the state party reporting process to be effective in terms of the rights of the person in the village, not the journalist, well-known journalist who has been arrested, not only the well-known journalist who has been arrested or this politician who's been arrested, while forgetting the bulk of our population who face human rights challenges every day. So what I'm saying is that we don't need a newspaper headline or a rap from the Human Rights Council for us to run and address certain things. So to answer your question, yes, to some extent it has helped. Isabella asked whether we would appreciate a combined reporting both at the UN and AU. Well, as I told you, my everyday job is state party reporting. So if we were to combine, I would have nothing to do. So let's keep them separate. But the main reason, hello?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
You can hear me, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the main reason why we have to keep them separate is because the reports are required under different treaties. So you have, for example, the International Covenant, that's UN, on civil and political rights, that's UN. Then you have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, that's the that's under the African system. So you can't combine two, international and regional. But what the UN has done, the UN is trying to come up with a more streamlined way of state-party reporting, because it's a lot of work, and the reports there's a huge backlog even for the UN committees. So they are trying to come up with a system. I don't know how it will go, to make the system a bit more organized, because right now it's a bit chaotic. I'll give you an example. We submitted our report on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2016, 5 years ago today, because the committee has a backlog. So it will help if we came up with a more useful way, but we'll keep them. Oh boy.
If we can also just cut the video and just leave only Pacharo's video, I think.
Sorry for all those.
That's okay. That's all right.
Yeah. So let me take the last question.
Yeah. If you have questions, just raise your hand using the icons in the app. Does anyone else have a question that or questions that Pacharo could respond to?
Marie asked a question which I need to respond to.
Okay, please go ahead.
The question was, do we evaluate how well our reports have dealt with issues, for example, overcrowding prisons or the coming up of laws? Yes, we do some sort of evaluation, and that's where the national task forces come in handy. Because when we meet as task forces, we are a bit more, not necessarily brutal, but a bit more honest with ourselves. They put institutions on the spot. If there were recommendations, for example, the Malawi Police Service, do this, and we meet in a meeting and this guy from police is not explaining well, we essentially say, no, go back, do a good job, bring back a better report. So we do evaluate this in our internal discussions even before we compile the report. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to abuse the privilege of host to ask a question. But before I go, maybe I'll ask Freda. I've seen your hand up. Do you wanna go ahead now?
Yes, thank you. I didn't really understand and how far you can reject those recommendations. So how much political freedom you have to adjust the measures to the country's specifics. So regarding the LGBTIQ+ rights, you said that Malawi is not yet ready to implement the recommendations. So how can you argue that you are not implementing those?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I gave an example of the two separate systems, treaty-based reporting and UPR. Universal Periodic Review, because it's a peer review of states and it's more of a political process, that one allows countries to reject recommendations. So we did UPR last year in November, and we did reject quite a good number of recommendations to do with, as I said, LGBTI, death penalty, abortion, and those things. Under that system, you are allowed to do that. Treaty-based state-party reporting, like the African Commission, which we are doing today, you get all the recommendations. You don't have an option of accepting or rejecting. They send them to you. But there is what I would call the subtle and the silent rejection, in the sense that once you get those recommendations, the government can decide which ones to implement and which ones to ignore. So even in treaty-based reporting, there's a way where governments ignore certain recommendations. And maybe in the report, you specifically say, we are not ready to implement this recommendation, or our laws or whatever doesn't allow us to do this. So that's how it works. UPR, more direct way of rejecting. Treaty-based state-party reporting a subtle and more sovereign way of rejecting recommendations. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I have I guess two practical questions. The first relates to the impact of your reporting mechanisms for so many treaty bodies. So I'll take the example of the CRC committee, the Children's Rights Committee, and the African Children's Rights Committee. You have to speak to many government departments in order to compile these reports and see what they are doing in the promotion and protection of children's rights. How has been your experience in asking the very same departments information for the CRC committee and for the African Children's Rights Committee, given that the reporting is at different times, and so it means that you are doing this ever so often? It's not just 5 years, it will be in between because you have to do for both. Isn't there the danger of fatigue there, and then you are given formulaic responses? That's the first question. And then the second relates to your coordinating role for the preparation of this committee. You've already indicated that in your approach, you invite all stakeholders to essentially contribute to the report. So your office is often acting as the secretariat for these different types of inputs. Okay, so it means that at any moment you are looking at 10 or so reports, whether you are preparing or maybe reacting to recommendations and all of that. And how efficient is that? Do you sort of feel that you have the capacity within this department to undertake all this work, or are there alternative approaches to dealing with the many human rights commitments that Malawi essentially has?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those questions. First question, impact of reporting and how we work with different departments in asking the same information over and over again. It is quite an experience and it can be frustrating at times for several reasons. One, the government way of doing things or the civil service way of doing things does not look at service delivery or whatever we do every day as a human rights issue. So, for example, you go to Ministry of Health and say, Ministry of Health, we're compiling a report on CRC. We have this role to play. We want you to be part of this task force. Can you get us somebody to sit on this task force who will be coordinating with? Ministry of Health, typical response will be, CRC, it has nothing to do with Ministry of Health. You know, they are failing to connect children's rights, health issues, human rights. They failure to connect them. So there's always a challenge to coordinate with these departments. In terms of, for example, the African Charter, I had to call the principal secretary in the Ministry of Health, who I know, because no one would write letters to health. We send us someone to connect to coordinate with us. They were not responding. I had to call this guy and say, this is what we're doing. I'm sending you this document. Give me a person. That's when we got somebody from health. So it can be a frustrating process, but we have improved a bit going along the way. How we have improved is through the same national task force. So as of today, if I need something from health or essentially almost all government departments, we have a file, name, email, phone number. I can pick up the phone and say, okay, Malawi prisons, I need statistics on the death penalty in Malawi. I'll pick up the phone, call this person, can you send me this? And he'll send me maybe by the evening or by tomorrow. So we have improved along the way. The challenge comes with the usual movements in government. You've been working very well with this person. Next time you call, and this is very key with Malawi police, you are told, this police officer was transferred to somewhere. That we have improved, but it's still a challenge. The fatigue is there. It can come. But for us, it's our job. It's our human rights job every day. So we, on our side, we are okay. But the fatigue comes from the other side, because to them, their everyday work is not human rights. So there are times when they say, you people and your reports, you people and your reports. So it's quite fascinating. And in terms of the second question, we're coordinating Rwanda as a secretariat, efficiency, capacity, and whether there are other approaches. We have also progressively improved. There was a time, I can assure you, 2010, when we were submitting our report on our first report on UPR, 2012, when we submitted our first report on ICCPR, it was only me and maybe one other person who coordinated that report. It was difficult. We have grown as a section, as a department, such that I have thematic desks. I know which officer deals with rights of women, an officer who deals with child rights, an officer who deals with rights of persons with disabilities. So each report or each treaty has one or two people who do research and who do the coordination as far as the drafting of that report is concerned. I just play the rules, the usual supervisory role. So in terms of capacity, we have improved. However, we still have a lot of challenges because our workload has increased with the passage of time. We started as a unit, now we're a section. And with that has come recognition and a lot of demand for our work. So like recently, Malawi became a member of the Human Rights Council in Geneva and will be there for 3 years. The amount of work which is coming out of the Human Rights Council is just overwhelming. And we're acting as a secretary for Malawi's term at the Human Rights Council. A lot of work. So we still need people. Other procedures, we are continuously trying to improve and be innovative, digitize our way of collecting data. We have improved in terms of, because previously there was a time when we needed to go to the districts to get information. We have improved on that in the sense that we are using what we call district councils here in Malawi. We have people in those districts who we just call and say, okay, I'll send you a questionnaire. I need statistics on school dropout rate in that district. Can you do research for us? That person will send the information to us. So we are continually trying to improve in terms of coordinating this. We have, as I said, thematic desks. If I had more people, we would have units within this section. So we'd have the child rights unit, would have the gender equality and women rights unit and stuff like that. Thank you.
Okay, all right. PK, I realize you have to step away now for your next appointment this morning. And again, let me express our gratitude on behalf of everyone in this class this morning that you could still make time despite such a pressing issue. And we are grateful also for your openness and your willingness to share what must be a very difficult and taxing function for the Malawi government. And personally, I'd like to thank you for your service, making sure that we do our best when it comes to promoting and protecting human rights through our various constitutional institutions and processes that we have promised Malawians. And it's awesome that a friend of mine gets to do this work. And so, guys, this brings us to the end of our first presentation. And I would like us to thank Pacharo for what was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Okay, bye-bye.